If you want to know the business model where you make more money after the sale than on the actual sale,
this is absolutely a real business model.
Okay, well, if you make all your profit on the initial sale and then you forget about the customer after that, oh boy, if you make a massive amount of revenue and you have a third-party market or whatever that comes in and deals with maintenance and support and service, and you're missing out on all that money and you're mad about it, step back a second. Hang on, I got more categories. If you're frustrated watching car dealerships make more through their service departments than through their dealer sales side, then step into my office. If you're leaving money on the table, step into my office. Because if I told you that you make thin margins on the initial sale and then you have a massive amount of profit on the back end for ongoing service and maintenance and whatnot, then you might be interested in the after sale business model.
Yeah, let's look at a couple of examples of these. We talked about a model where you could buy hardware like printer for X amount of money and then keep paying over and over for ink. That is after sales, really.
Yes.
I mean, the other one that, obviously, the automotive industry, right? You're paying X for your car and then they lock you in, etc.
Tesla, also the supercharging network for Tesla. Let's see, Peloton, which is more like a subscription company than it is like a workout machine company, right? And also, if we're talking about exploitative things that have really rankled people's feelings in the news, John Deere. Because if you remember, you had to go back to them for parts and service. They locked out all their stuff, with software. So there are quite a few in this category that you wouldn't necessarily think of.
Electronics. I mean, you buy electronics and then you buy, warranty. So the warranty, I mean, they get you. So things like appliances, you buy washer, dryer, whatever. And then you buy warranted for 3 years because things only warranted for 1 year. They can stack them. And then at the end of the 3 years or before then, they'll hit you up to extend again for another 3 years at a higher price because now appliances are older, more susceptible to breaking. So these are examples of the after sale business model.
And also there's other ones that normal folks, unless you work for a company like this, you probably would never think of, Boeing. You think you can just go down to Advanced Auto and buy a new part for a jet engine? You probably got to go back to Boeing or whatever company they contract with to build those parts. But I mean, so it's the maintenance contracts. I would imagine, for a company like Boeing, for example, I would imagine the maintenance contracts are probably worth you build your original airplane for whatever $100 million or whatever it is you build a plane, $60 million, whatever it is you build a plane for. Yeah. But then the ongoing maintenance contracts to be able to get parts, new engines, stuff like that. Like Rolls-Royce, for example, the engines they build for aircraft. Do you think they make the majority of their money on their cars or off of the aircraft engine division?
Right.
That Rolls-Royce doesn't have, they don't make airplanes. There's a lot of companies that you probably would never think of that are super profitable just because they have these contracts. They just do these contracts, and it's a massive amount of money. And some of them are controlled by the main company. Some of them are not. But, high margin. I think about the U.S. government and, fighter jets, for example, where they have to buy, a silly little part. There's people on YouTube all the time that you can see. But there's some of these, defense acquisition guys that I follow on LinkedIn. I'm going to start spitting when I say LinkedIn. Terrible, but it's almost as bad as Jira. Some of these defense acquisition guys that I follow on LinkedIn, they're showing this little tiny little metal part that we can't get except for the manufacturer that's $5,000 that we started 3D printing it for $3.
I think that model that's been there for decades is now being disrupted by technologies like 3D. So there are other countries where they couldn't find, forget about fighter jets and stuff. I mean, they couldn't find spare parts for imported cars,
right?
Unless you went to the manufacturer. Now what they're doing is fashioning them. And before 3D printing became a thing, they were already creating those out of bare lump of metal. They were actually fashioning parts and manufacturing them. Could be subpar, doesn't matter, but way affordable than going back to the manufacturer. For now, 3D printing, anyone can print out parts like that. So that model is going to be disrupted even further going forward. Maybe not quite with the Boeing scale, but on a lower level.
The customer lock-in, especially with John Deere, where they locked out with software their parts, where you can't just change parts. Yeah, that's the strength of this model, but also I almost want to pivot right into weaknesses, where it's in the weaknesses of this model. Customer resentment is a big thing with this one because John Deere got in a lot of trouble in the press. He got beat up pretty hard, rightfully so, by the way, with this customer resentment of why? I just got to replace some mechanical part. And then it's sort of like the part has some sort of electronic component in it that's stamped with like a VIN number or something like that. Like in the computer, it's stamped with a VIN number. So it knows that you've changed out a part.
And then it shuts down.
And then it shuts down.
That's predatory, I feel. But I think an example of this might be if you have any extended warranties for your iPhone or Apple Care.
Yeah, Apple Care, yeah, good one.
That's an example. The risk you run here is disruption through a third party being able to offer the same kind of service.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, in the case of Apple, hey, they have to play within the Apple wall gardens.
I mean, Apple Care is an interesting one because there's like an organizational conflict that we haven't talked about, like inside of the organization that sells Apple Care. Like just maybe this is not a great example, but let's use this example for a second. The people that sell the products have to also tack on Apple Care, which they may or may not want to do. There's a whole nother team that's only incented by the service and the cost of selling Apple Care. They're financed by the sales of Apple Care to people bringing in the store, and then there's text in the back and all that kind of stuff. So I would think that, like, the less Apple Care subscriptions, the less of those people can work at the store, you know, that kind of thing. So it's like there's an organizational kind of like, well, if I jack up the price of Apple Care, it's harder to sell more phones and it's harder to sell Apple Care. I don't know how they deal with that kind of thing, but it is a conflict. Anything that requires being talked about between folks in the organization is a weakness of the model, because as we know on the podcast, people don't like to talk to people.
Exactly.
But yeah,
What a concept.
customer resentment. I mean, you know, it's and then the Apple Care one.
Service is 24%.
So Apple doesn't break out Apple Care specifically, but it says it's responsible for 24%. Apple Services is responsible for 24% of the revenue.
Check the next bullet.
Apple Care and extended warranties are $8.4 billion in 2025. So
That's
a
more
good
than
amount.
our nation's GDP. $8.4 billion.
The services division has substantially higher gross margin, around 75%, compared to the hardware sales, around 39%. That comes from Rando Google AI search. So that's interesting. Like, the margins are way higher. If you were a company and you want to set up something like Apple Care for the first time, like, there's a longer cycle to profitability.
Yeah.
You know, that's something to consider. It's a little less of a weakness, but it is something to consider. So the after sale business model, like, it brings in a bunch of revenue, obviously, for Apple, 24%. Yikes. That's pretty significant. Mm-hmm. It's all about capturing ongoing value through service, maintenance, and support without being a predatory. What was the previous one that we just talked about? The cycle business model, the predatory cycle business model.
I'm pretty sure you guys have other examples in mind, so please let us know.
Yeah.